a circle involving several countries such as Vietnam, Korea, Japan, Taiwan, of course, and China. These are countries that adopt kanji and classical handwriting as the official written language before the 20th century. Okay, know that the timing is important because after the 20th century, something has changed. For example, Vietnam, they adopted in the 20th century something called Chu Nom, that is a derivative of the Han characters as the official languages. And this writing system replaced the Romanized writing system they established in 1945. And in Korea, the Han character was replaced by phonemic system, Hangul, after World War II. I don't know how many of you know Korean, but I think this Hangul system is very clever from the linguistic point of view because they are written according to their consonants and vowels. The way they write their characters now, even though they were only circles, strokes, and so on, but each one is a representation of how they are actually pronounced. I think it's pretty clever. And in Japan, and we have Japanese speakers here in this room. Of course, Han characters decreased from the 1000 to 1945, frequently used ones by 1981. So I think fewer and fewer people are using the Han characters or the Chinese character in Japan. I don't know if we can.
But I think I heard that Japan added, I think, like 700 last year or this year to the 1,945.
Okay, they added 700 more?
I think so.
Okay, and that's interesting because I haven't had a chance to know what's the rationale behind. Perhaps, Tomomi, you want to tell us something about, based on what you know?
I don't really know about this. I use usually, so I don't feel if it decreases or increases.
Okay, you don't know about the increasing or decreasing. We can check that out online later on, and I'll give you the updated information. But for some time, especially toward the end of the 20th century, I think fewer and fewer people in Japan, they are using the Han character or the Chinese character. And the younger generation, like those younger generation in Korea, they were not able to read the kanji, the Chinese writing system. Back in 50 or 60 years ago in Japan, in order for you to know Chinese, some of those people, they are really good at classical Chinese. They could read the Chinese classical poem by converting at the same time into their Japanese word order. So you probably know about the word order in Chinese. What's the word order in Chinese in terms of subject, object, and verb? What's the word order? Chinese. I like you, right? I like you. That would be the word order in Chinese. What's the word order in Japanese? It's verb final. Sometimes because they have case marking system, this can be reversed, right? Okay, but anyway, it's the verb final language. So in order to be good at Chinese writing system and you really know the Chinese language well, for a Japanese scholar, they could read at a Chinese poem written in this word order, but when they translate it, at the same time, right away, they could just read it into the Japanese word order. Okay, so that was quite difficult, but I don't think not too many younger generation, young people in Japan are able to do that now. Same thing with the Korean younger generation. If you watch Korean soap opera, you can look at many of the actors and actress' names were written in the Han character. So they also have some, their name could be written in the Chinese characters as well. And so what would be the reason? What would be the motivation behind this orthographic reform? There are two kinds of factors, internal versus external. For the internal factors, usually it's the general public's demand for literacy because they want to be able to write in their own way. Perhaps the Chinese writing system is kind of complicated. And also due to the anti-feudal hierarchy. And the external factors are political relationship between the country. For example, if two countries are not in friendly or good relationship, probably there is a need for the change. And also the origin of the Han character is also another reason behind the change. So, what's the relationship between the native language, including the writing system, and the national identities? There are pros and cons in terms of the relationship between the two. On the pro side, we can look at Vietnam and Korea. Do we have anyone who can read Vietnamese or speak Vietnamese here in this room, or Korean? No? Do you know anything about why do we place these two countries on the pro side? Any guess?
You mean their relationship to Chinese?
No. The native language and their national identity. So for example, if the Korean people, if they write in Chinese character, what's the relationship between this writing system and the national identity of themselves being Koreans?
Well, it's not related at all. Koreans have a separate linguistic family. It's just a gluten there.
Yeah, okay. The Korean language and also the Japanese language belong to another family, language family called the Altai language family. So which is different. However, if you look at Ireland, you know about Ireland, right? They are so proud of their own national language, which is Irish. That's totally mutually unintelligible with the British English spoken in other islands. And this language has brought apart the two, should I call it two nations? It's not two nations. I don't know. What should I call it? Island is a nation, right? It's a country. So, even though they're supposed to be coming from the same origin, but because of the language difference, there's such a, I would say, hostile attitude toward people from the other country. In fact, I was just asked by one student, how come there are so many names to call the Great Britain? You can call it Great Britain, you can call it England, Ireland, Scotland, right? There are 3 islands. And in Chinese, we call it 英伦三岛, the 3 islands in the Great Britain. And why is that? Because they are divided. And from what we have seen in the movie called My Fair Lady, remember played by Audrey Hepburn, I have shown you, language is such an issue because of even people who are speaking the same language, as long as you are speaking different dialects, you are judged by the dialect for your social status. So Ireland and also in the United States, what about the United States? Before 1980s, we call United States a melting pot, right? A melting pot. What does that mean? Yeah, they welcome a lot of people from outside and they want you to blend in, but they do not forbid you to speak your own language at home, right? They encourage you to keep your own mother tongue. After the 1980s, what happened in the United States? We still refer to it as a melting pot? Yes? We have a lot of people from the United States.
Is it salad bowl?
Oh, a salad bowl? No. I think now we would call it
I heard the salad bowl thing too.
Yeah, we have that in the slide.
Oh, okay. I think a better term, a euphemism, would be called it a country that's encouraging pluralism. pluralism, right? Okay, so pluralism is that you encourage different culture, different language to flourish in the land of America, but not necessarily a melting pot as they were before the 1980s. So, okay, so according to this article, we put it on the con side for the moment. And we'll see what happened later on. Okay. So a Western view for the national identity is that you have the concept of nation state, which is a concept formed by perhaps publication, propaganda, by religious reform, and also by the mother tongue that each of the speakers would belong to or would speak. And this is taken from Anderson's article in 1991. So for example, if you look at the Renaissance, where you have the national literature, and the national literature is formed because of these factors. But such Western view probably is only to create something that is imagined. For example, Anderson in 1991 again said that an imagined Hanji cultural community prompts the construction of nation state in Chinese character-based circle. So the Chinese character-based circle refers to those 5 countries that we have just mentioned. And this is the imagined Hanji cultural community because they share the same writing system using the Chinese character. And this sense of community based on the Chinese Han character is an imagined Hanji culture community. So what we normally or we used to call 中华民族, the Chinese, how would you say this in English? Min is people, 族 is a tribes. So it's a country that's formed by many different tribes, including the minorities. How many minorities are there in China? 56. Yeah, normally we talk about 56 tribes, and Han being the major tribes, right? Han being the major tribe, but there are many minority tribes. So it's a country or it's a nation formed by many different tribes. So that's why we call it 中华民族. You know, it's a nation formed by many different minority tribes. But if you have this Hanji character, you have this Han character, this community formed by this Han character, probably something different could be created. According to this author, the article, perhaps an imagined cultural community of 中国国族 could be created, okay, because of the same writing system. But still, this would exclude minorities like 壮族, 苗族, and 瑶族. These are the minority in the west southern part of China. For example, the 壮族 is in Guangxi province, in the southern part of China, and 苗族, 瑶族 probably is in Yunnan province in China. Okay. But if you look at this country, Vietnam, Korea, and Japan, when they have their unique writing system, they have their unique language, probably it's not a cultural community that is imagined after all. So let's look at the linguistic factor and the political factors that's affecting the writing system and the sense of community formed because of this common writing system. A writing system is by no means equal to one's national identity. Okay, you are just using the writing system, but that has nothing to do with your national community. And we talk about the language versus the dialect differences. In China, because we have so many tribes and because we have such a large territory, so you have many, many languages, but because it's fall under one single nation, you tend to call it different dialects of the single language rather than different languages. But as we know, Cantonese and Mandarin or Taiwanese, Taiwanese Southern Min, or for example, the Zhuang language, the Miao language, they are not mutually intelligible with the Mandarin. So in this case, according to the linguistic characterization or linguistic standard, they should not be called a dialect of the same language. They are actually different languages because they are not mutually intelligible. But because they fall under the same nation, we tend to call it dialects rather than language. Okay, so mutually intelligible is the criteria that we, as linguists, would like to differentiate between language and dialect. And this is according to Crystal. I believe Chester has shown you the bio of Crystal at one of your discussion session. And let's look at the situation in Sweden, Norway, and between these three languages. Many of you have written about these languages because you come from that area. So I would like to invite those of you who know well the situation in these countries to share your view with us. Do we have any volunteer? Okay. Petia and also Miriam, right? Miriam can tell us a little bit about the situation. So you want to talk to the class about what you know? Mm-hmm. Okay. Lady first or gentleman first?
About how they are.
How are they mutually intelligible? How many languages are there, and how many dialects under the same language family? Or they are two different languages, but they are mutually intelligible because of historical or because of the political situation. So anything you want to share with the class? How about Miriam first? Okay, just face the class so that people in the back could also hear you.
Yes, they all come from Old Norse, so they are like same roots. And so the Norwegian and Danish understand Swedish pretty well, and the Swedes do understand Norwegians, but they have a bit more difficulty in understanding Danish because it's a bit more different than Norwegian and Swedish. But usually they could speak their own mother tongue to each other, and they could all understand it. They have local dialects, all of them. I don't know how many of them are, and they do sound different, but I think in general terms they are all mutually intelligible, so there shouldn't be any problem with all these three countries to understand each other.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Did you get it? Okay, more or less. And Patty, you want to supplement?
Especially if someone speaks the standard version of their
Face the group so that they can hear you.
If someone speaks the standard or the most common version of their own language, then it's easier to understand. Like if someone speaks Stockholm Swedish, I think it's easier to understand than if someone speaks another Swedish. Like there's in Sweden, there's a place called Skåne, and they have a very sometimes more difficult to understand accent, but it's okay. And I have more trouble understanding Danish than Swedish, but I also think it has to do with the amount of influence we get from the other countries. Like Swedish has a very prominent media situation. I think it's Scandinavian more music and also a lot of films and series. But then again, Denmark recently has made some series too, so we get a lot of influence. So it's not only because they're similar, it's also because we use the languages in media all the time too. But I always speak Norwegian to Swedes if I meet Swedes. I haven't met that many Danish people. It's usually not a problem. And we usually, if they don't understand I just say the Swedish word, and they will just say the Norwegian word.
So you're quite open. I mean, either language will be fine. There's no hostility. You're not hostile toward speakers of another language, and there's no
So sometimes it's more difficult to understand some dialects of Norwegian than to understand Swedish.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because some Norwegian dialects are so conservative and difficult and has so many strange sounds that I don't understand it. They speak quickly.
Yeah, perhaps either one of them would share with us more during their final presentation. I don't know if that's what they plan to talk about. I believe we also have another person from that area. Alice? Is she here? She's not here. Okay. I don't know if she would be talking about that also. But I know we have 3 persons that could talk very well on this subject. Okay. So, mutually intelligible. Even people between different countries that could be mutually intelligible because of the historical background. So now we have 2 terms that I would like to introduce to you because of this multilingual situation. If in a place you have 2 versions of the spoken language, you can call that place a place of diglossia because you have 2 spoken languages. Di means 2, right? Okay, so you have 2 languages. If that refers to the writing system, then you have another term that's called digraphia. That means graph means writing. So you have 2 kinds of writing system. So usually these are the terms introduced to us by linguists such as Charles Ferguson in 1959. So 2 varieties of the same language carrying with each different social function. So probably, I don't know if this is the case with Norwegian, Danish. If you are speaking different language to fulfill different social function, for example, with people from the same region, you will speak the language that you are familiar with. Or is this the situation?
You mean within which?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but in Norway we have 2 official versions of our language, but we have no spoken standard. But we have 2, not 2 writing systems, but 2 written languages that are used in different parts of the country.
Oh, that's a digraphia.
I don't think it's called
Digraphia.
call it digraphia either, because it's not really 2 different systems because they're not used for the same language. They're used for
2 different languages. Okay. I don't know how many of you will watch the talk shows or the political talk shows of the Taiwan TV, program. If any one of you happens to do it, notice the code switch among the speakers, among the invited speakers for those talk shows. Sometimes they will switch to Taiwanese Southern Min. Or sometimes they would just stick to Taiwanese Southern Min, even though the program was supposed to be in Mandarin, or not supposed to be because of the host speaks Mandarin to all the invited speakers. But the speakers has a freedom to switch between one language to the other, mainly just Taiwanese Southern Min and Mandarin. And to me, that is so much like a diglossia situation. And they are using the 2 languages to fulfill different functions, not necessarily social function, but they have different motivation for the switch. Usually when we do code switching, sometimes we do it unconsciously, right? Because, for example, I will tell my students my office hours and this and that. I just don't know what's the Chinese rendition for office hour. I don't know if any fluent Chinese speaker could help me out because I cannot think of a good term to call office hour. So you can make an appointment with me. So in Chinese I would say, 你可以来看我. But what does that mean? That's not office hour at all. So I probably do the switch unconsciously. But if you watch the talk show, the political talk show, I think the switch is not necessarily unconscious. I think there's a purpose behind, and they want to fulfill certain functions, not necessarily social. Stefan, did you want to say something?
No.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I just thought that I saw a hand up. Okay, so because of the diglossia situation, sometimes we would differentiate them in terms and call one of the version high language and the other low language. Or one is formal and literary versus informal and colloquial. We will explain that later on. Okay, formal versus informal, that's easy to understand. For example, you would talk to your friends using the formal register, but using the informal register, but in class you are supposed to use the formal register. That's a social linguistic differentiation. Literary versus colloquial. If you know Chinese and if you know classical Chinese, what we are talking about in our conversation, that will be more colloquial. But what is written in the book, that will be more literary, not necessarily the classical. Even the written language, that will be considered literary, written one, and versus the spoken, what you use in your daily conversation. So in 1967, another famous social linguist, Joshua Fishman, talked about these high language versus low language are not necessarily of the same language. It could be two different languages. You switch back and forth. Okay. And it's not necessarily limited to languages. For example, in the situation that Petia and Million just shared with us, you are switching among 3 languages, or at least 3 languages, right? So this kind of situation, even though we use the term diglossia, is not necessarily limited to 2 languages. And with the digraphia, another scholar extended what Charles Ferguson has said about diglossia to the writing system. And the Francis in 1984 maintains the same. A lot of people are happy to see the Francis because when you learn Chinese, you probably use his textbook, right? Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Because you are young. If you are much older, you probably will be using the Y.R. Charles textbook. Okay. So the younger generation will be using the Francis. He is teaching in University of Hawaii, and that's where I studied for my PhD. Very nice guy. Okay. So scholar said when you have more than one writing system in one society, and each one of them has different communicative function, then you can call it a place with digraphia. That means you have 2 different writing systems. Okay, so how about the Han circle? When in the Han circle, for the spoken languages, we have the Wenyan, which is a literary language, the classical Chinese, that will be the Wenyan Wen. And you have the Baihua Wen that we talked about, which is colloquial that we use in conversation every day with your friends. Or if you have ever watched a puppet show in Chinese, 布袋戏, okay, the puppet show, which was very famous when I was junior high student. That was when the puppet show was really popular on TV, and we watched it every day, noontime, around 12:15 to 12:45 or something like that. And it was such a hit. Everybody was crazy about the show. And in the puppet show, you have heroes, and you also have clowns. The heroes would usually speak the high language, which is more literary, and they could read out loud poems, and they could talk like a scholar, like a literary man. But the clowns would usually use the low language, which is colloquial. So the same thing with commoner and emperor. The emperor will use the high language, but the commoner will use the low language. And in terms of the writing system, we also have the high language and the low language. For example, the high language would be the language written in the Han character, but the low language would be those that's written in the system developed by each individual countries. Okay, that's according to the classification by the author of this article. So here we have the kana of Japan, and since we have Japanese speakers here, or we have people who knows Japanese well, does any one of you want to share with us about your kana system? You have katakana and hirakana, right? So anyone? You want to say something? Well, John is not here also, right? Okay. Okay, share with us what you know about. Want to tell us something about your kana system?
Originally, katakana is from Chinese character. Chinese character, the ancient Japanese people make katakana into make the Chinese character into now katakana. So it really looks like the part of the Chinese character, like how to explain it.
Part of it, right? Can you just show us with I-WEN or another? Yeah, write it. Because you are taking it from the Chinese writing system, right? Yeah, okay. James, do you know some Japanese? You want to share with us?
But not nearly as good as his Japanese.
Okay, either one of you, if you want to say something about hirakana or katakana.
I just what I mean is basically Chinese characters, and first there was like intermediate Taiwan there is manual gana,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like it's period when characters were like there were a lot of characters used to represent the phonetic values of Japanese, and that eventually they both came down to katakana.
Yeah.
Originally mostly used by men, and then hiragana was mostly reserved by women, but then the changes kind of equaled out as time went on. And if you look at earlier works written in Japanese, you see works written only in kanji and katakana.
Mm-hmm.
By I think usually male scholars.
Yeah. Okay. So you have at least 3 kind of writing system, right? You have one writing system mainly in the Han characters, the Chinese writing system. But then you have, what do you call this? Hirakana? Hirakana and katakana. Okay, this is reserved for long words. When you borrow something from, for example, for English, you would use this system. Okay, and this is a hirakana. That's what our classmate has shared with us. This was taken from the Chinese character, but the script style of the Chinese character, and they made it into this simplified version. So in Japanese, you have 3 kinds of writing system. And according to the author of this article, thank you, Tomomi, thank you. They consider the writing system in the Han characters, the high language one, and the low language will be the one, for example, the kana, these 2, okay? And they are reserved for different function, okay? So for a lot of Japanese speaker, not Japanese speaker, people who knows Japanese, for example, like my mother, she's a fluent speaker of Japanese, but she found it very difficult to read Japanese nowadays because you have a lot of long words from English. You have a lot of borrowing from English, and they are all written in this way. And if you don't know English, even if you know English, sometimes if you spelled it out, it doesn't sound like English. So she found it very difficult to understand, to read the Japanese writing nowadays. For example, the TV program, how would you call it in Japanese now?
We can say TV program.
You see? And bangomi. And what's the other one? Mangumi, right. Okay, so they probably know the other one, but they do not know TV program. So she found it very difficult to read Japanese nowadays. And you even have a dictionary of long words. Just for the long words, you have a complete dictionary in order to help you understand what they are trying to say. Okay? All right. So this high versus low languages, the status may change. And what are the factors for such change? Probably political factors. Okay? If you have different political situation, and the status may be different. Or maybe the linguistic structure of the writing system may prompt the change as well. So for example, Kana nowadays has become the high language because you probably, the younger generation, would use the Kana system more than the Chinese Han character system. Is that right? Okay. And for example, in the Vietnam system, the Romanization one will become the high language because it's more common for them. And whereas the minority tribes in China, such as the Zhuangzu, Miaozu, and Yaozu, their writing system would still be considered as a low language. We have a speaker of Yangnan, right? What do you speak? Any of the minority languages?
I'm not sure
Hmong is part of Miao, right? That's actually a Miao tribe. So if you can speak that language, then can you write in your own language?
I can read it, but I can't write it.
You cannot write it. Okay. So this is a very interesting class because you have people from different part of the world and who are knowledgeable in many different kind of languages. Okay. So then we have the question: is your first language the language you are fluent with? Sometimes, not necessarily. Okay? Is that true? Dorothy, what's your first language? Okay, she has to think about it. That's interesting.
Because I grew up, or like, before kindergarten, I guess I spoke Mandarin, primarily Mandarin, and then, so it's like my first language, but I'm not that fluent, so.
So Mandarin is supposed to be your first language, but
But then some people would argue that I learned them simultaneously, but I don't really think so.
is first language necessarily your mother tongue? Not necessarily. Okay, good. So at least that's clear. One's mother tongue versus your ethnic language or versus your national language, they are probably different as well. And usually one's mother tongue is one's ethnic or one's national language, with the exception of the situation of immigration or when you study abroad, or if you have a situation of being colonialized, probably then this statement would not hold, and which would apply to many of your own personal experience. So I think this is kind of self-evident. Okay, so when you have many different languages, it probably would lead to divergence and language shift. We talk about language shift. That means a language has changed into or been shifted to another one. And divergent means you have more than one language, many different language situations. So more and more divergence will lead to language shift as well. And I look forward to hear many of your presentation in the next 2 times, because I want to know if you have touched upon this topic, probably you can think along this line as well, whether it's true or not. When you have more and more divergence in your linguistic situation, will they lead to a language shift? In Taiwan, I think we have seen it very clearly. For example, in the Formosan languages spoken in Taiwan, especially the plain tribes, those tribes living on the plain, because of language contact and borrowing, they have been influenced by their neighboring languages, such as Hakka languages, if these tribes live in the Miaoli or Hsinchu area, okay? And so that's the Taiwan plain tribes. The vernacular shift has been taking place. In Ireland also, Ireland as a national language and English as an official language, although English is used in Ireland, but in Ireland there are two different kind of systems. You have the so-called national language and the official language. In the one country that I have lived before, I would call it a country anyway, in Puerto Rico, we have Spanish as the national language and we have English as the, well, I shouldn't say that. Okay, Spanish is the national language and the official language is both English and Spanish. How does that work? If you have a lawsuit and you have to go to the local court, the language would be Spanish. If the lawsuit goes to the federal court, then the official language is English. Okay? But if you go out and do grocery shopping, Spanish is the only language that you can communicate with people, even though many people do speak English, but people prefer Spanish over English. But if you want to climb up the social ladder, unfortunately, English is still a must. This is the situation with many countries nowadays in the world. If you look at Singapore, where we have watched the movie, I think English is a language that would help a lot of Singaporeans to climb up the social ladder. Okay, so this was the situation, still is the situation in Puerto Rico, a country that have lived many years. And I always found it confusing. So in the federal court and also in the local court, they have a high demand for translators. And if you go to the hospital, usually Spanish is used. So I would say Spanish is a language, a national language, but English and Spanish are both considered the official language depending on which level you are dealing with. And in Puerto Rico, for example, what kind of currency will be used there, according to your imagination? Puerto Rico. What kind of currency? US dollar. Yeah, US dollar. Okay, and because it's not really a country. It's called Estado Librado. What's that called? Liberal state. It's called a liberal state. So it's not one state of the United States, but it enjoys the status of being a state. So you have low income subsidy. You can do business in Puerto Rico. You do not have to pay the federal tax, but you have to pay the local tax. You have to serve in the U.S. Army. Okay, and if there's a war situation, because you are born a U.S. citizen, you will be the first bunch or the first batch to be drafted into the army. You understand? That is not a very fair situation, but that is the case. And if you were born in Puerto Rico, you would never have the chance to be elected as the president of the United States. But if you have resided in the United States for 6 months, then you are eligible to vote for the presidency. Get it? Okay. So it's not a really equal situation. You have some benefit, but you also pay the price. Okay, Stefan.
Similar to Macau or Hong Kong, maybe?
Similar to Hong Kong and Macau.
Because, like, many parts are controlled by mainland China, but there are still really many independent areas they can control on their own.
No, I think Hong Kong is a little bit different because mainland China claims that it still has its own independent status, except that the governor of Hong Kong is appointed by mainland China. But in Hong Kong, you are still using Hong Kong dollar, even though you can also use the renminbi, the Chinese currency. And I believe Macau is the same way with Hong Kong, but it's a little bit different from the situation in Puerto Rico. I don't know if that would be similar to the situation in Japan. You have what's the island called? Ryucho. What is Okinawa. Is that the same?
I don't think they use US dollar or I don't know because there is military base. So I think it's more Japan.
It's more Japan. But you still consider people in Okinawa speaking with Okinawa accent, right? It's different from the Japanese.
It's different, but we can still understand.
You can still understand.
But actually, there are some people who are thinking to be independent. So it's, they think it, but the language spoken in there, we can still understand.
Okay, so there are many of these so-called liberal states or this kind of, I think it's just a matter of euphemism because what's the difference between a colonization and liberal state? I think the name I probably have introduced this term before, euphemism. That means you use a better term to package what you want to say, even though the content is not that different. For example, you all know what is a salesman, right? What's the kind of social status or what is your imagination or what's your evaluation of someone being a salesman versus if I call the same person a business executive. These are probably, I probably are using these two terms to refer to the same person. But if you want to package it and make it sound better, you will not call a person salesman. You will call it a business executive. Just like a lot of people don't like to be called a housewife. So what would be a euphemism for housewife?
Stay-at-home mom.
Stay home. Thank you. No, that's not so good either. This is true. They call themselves, or some people refer to them as domestic engineer. Okay? Have you heard that? Yeah, okay. But that's like housewife. So euphemism is another way to package the same thing. So the reference, the person or the object that you are referring to is the same one. However, you are using different terms to call them. And that's the magic of language, because you can use language to package many things to make it sound better, much better. Okay? All right, so this is about the Han sphere situation, since we are all dealing with the Chinese writing system, even though this is not a course on Chinese, but because we talk about the language, and I thought it might be good to also cover the writing system. And to make you understand, when you know how to write the Chinese writing, when you are familiar with the Chinese writing system, you probably have a possibility to be able to be exposed to many different countries. They are also using the same kind of writing system. And the Han sphere, I don't think it's difficult to be formed. In fact, probably we all feel the same way deep down inside. All right, so let's take a break, and when we come back, I'll show something else related to this topic.